Poland in Europa Universalis 5 is a poor country where you don't control over half of the kingdom, because the nobility holds that power. And I will show you how, in less than 100 years, to increase Poland's wealth more than 1,000-fold, show the nobility where their place is, and spread authority across the entire kingdom, which will allow me to embark on the path of creating a Polish empire. And all of this in 8 quick steps. Step 1 is everything you need to do before unpausing the game. Step 2 is building an economy based on salt and silk. Step 3 is fixing a historical mistake. Step 4, a double strike. Step 5 will show you how to conquer Silesia without getting crushed by a coalition. Step 6 is surviving civil wars and reforming the country. Step 7 is an economic leap. And in step 8, I will tell you what comes next. Welcome imperialists, Lucas here. Playing Poland in Europa Universalis 5, there are several things you absolutely must do before unpausing, otherwise the campaign becomes much more difficult. I start by breaking the alliance with Lithuania, so I go into hostile actions and break the alliance. Next, I immediately designate the Teutonic Order as Poland's rival. Poland and the Order have a truce until 1343, and essentially I need to be ready for war with them by that time. Additionally, there are 2 smaller duchies here in Bohemia that are also worth designating as Polish rivals. Research. Poland very quickly needs additional diplomatic points, so I go down that path first and only afterward move toward increasing the number of RGOs as usual. An increased maximum number of diplomatic points will also be useful. And later on, faster institutions spread. Laws and privileges. Government reforms remain unchanged for now. We basically have the 2 best reforms available to a monarchy. I do not grant any new privileges to the peasants, because in Poland they simply know their place. And it is through their hard work that I will build this country's economy. For the burghers, however, I increase tax efficiency. I boost prosperity to make it even higher across the entire country. And that's it for now. Roads and inflation reduction I leave for a later stage of Poland's development, somewhere around 20 years from now. Unless you want the Black Death to spread effectively throughout your country, then go ahead. You can build more roads because that will help the plague, and any other spread more efficiently. Clergy. 2 privileges that increase communalism. As for the nobility, I am not granting any privileges at this moment. When I do, I'll mention it in the video. Unless, as usual, I forget. Poland also has very low crown power. To deal with that, in Krakow you need to build a sergeantry building as quickly as possible. And as soon as you can afford it, you should recruit some professional troops, preferably heavy cavalry. But even infantry will be a good solution. Now the budget, I maximize taxes. For the nobility as much as possible, of course. Similarly, for the burghers and the peasantry, I reduce spending on forts. And that's it. I do not reduce spending on diplomacy, because as Poland I need to use my points to improve relations with vassals, as well as with the only neighbor I want good relations with, Hungary. Legitimacy in Poland, I will fund only enough to maintain around 70 points for now. Since Poland has advanced decentralization, relations with the estates improve more or less on their own. I will use the cabinet to shift values toward communalism and to encourage population migration to Krakow. Poland has only one major city, Krakow, and it is our most important location. As for Casimir's children, unfortunately there are 2 princesses and nothing we can do about it at this moment. I educate them depending on their traits. In Poland, I will very often use the migration edict, so a talented princess in that area will be useful. And basically all that's left now is to spend this money. And how to do that effectively I'll show you in step 2, where I will focus on building the early economy. Now it's up to you whether on ENEBA during the Steam sale you can grab some interesting codes. Links to additional discounts are in the description. To make them work, you have to click them. And now let's get back to building the economy. You'd probably want to expand the salt mine in Krakow right away, right? That would actually be quite a big mistake. First, you need to secure building materials, and the Polish market lacks stone and tools, so in Krakow I build stonemasons. Then I set up the first weavers guilds, because that gives the biggest boost to the budget. And in Wieliczka I build market village for tool production. And only now do I actually unpause, when the joint succession of Poland and Hungary is about to happen. In short, I tell them to get lost, because I don't want to be that close with that country. That's because it would block changing the inheritance system in our country. And honestly, I'll want to switch to favored son very quickly, because it gives me access to the best possible heir, and that's exactly why I immediately started improving relations with Hungary, because I knew I would reject that pact. And that has a very negative impact on relations between our countries. For the next few years, the main location I will develop is Krakow. And Wieliczka, let's not forget about it. Basically, whenever I have burghers, I check what gives me the most money down here and build that structure. And in Wieliczka, whenever I have workers, I expand it. That's the entire philosophy of building power and wealth in this game. My wife dies, well, as usual. Some minor plague spreads, as usual. During events, I always choose the option that increases exploitation of the peasants. Or rather, I encourage them to work harder. One of the most important buildings you need to construct in Krakow is a library. Yes, I know, I'm a monster forcing people to read, but what I care about is social promotion, and this building significantly accelerates it. But before you can even build it, you need to construct a scriptorium to produce books. From Hungary, I also gain 10 favor points, which I will use in the upcoming wars. First parliament, do nothing. Seriously, hold off. The union with Halic was formed, but honestly, I completely ignore that country, I don't care about it, and I don't develop this union. Because realistically, I have very little chance of reforming it anyway. You'd have to reach that stage, which takes 40 years. Only then could I change the inheritance system in both our countries to have a shared ruler, and I doubt Casimir will live that long. In year 40, I begin building a spy network against the Teutonic Order. The conflict over Vyskova is very important and gives me territorial claims that I may or may not use. That depends on several factors. Year 42 and the choice of the first idea. And here, honestly, I consider two paths, diplomatic or military. Military mainly because of the modifier that gives greater tolerance for heathens and heretics, and better cavalry, and in Poland we're obsessed with cavalry. Diplomatic for that amazing modifier, it allows me to increase how much I can improve relations with a given country. For example, with a vassal up to 240 instead of 200. And that means I'd need over 200 points of antagonism for a coalition to even form, though that's a bad example because my vassal can't join a coalition against me. Never mind, you get the idea. The second reason is simply the ability to conquer more and make claims faster. I would only choose administrative for consolidation and faster research. This time I'm going with the diplomatic path. I find a second wife for Casimir. Unfortunately, the wife's stats are not important. In year 43 I do two things. I hold the first parliament, where I first request a 25% increase in levies. If you get lucky with the agenda, you can reform several laws in Poland. For me, the most important change is the distribution of power, where I will favor the nobility, allowing me to collect higher taxes. It will also let me effectively use the strength of the nobility for further reforms. These legal changes already make me earn practically twice as much. The second thing is, unfortunately, I start fabricating a casus belli on Chełmno, because I didn't get the event that grants me claims on the Teutonic Order. Unfortunately, I'm unlucky and Bohemia didn't fight any stupid wars, so their army is at full strength and is too powerful. And I have no chance in a war against Bohemia, even if Hungary supported me. Prince Władysław is born, hopefully he's a genius. Not really. Unfortunately, I was ready for the war with the Teutonic Order 2 years later. Krakow had been expanded, which provided a massive contribution to my budget. Literally 40% of my budget comes from Krakow. So I've completed the early economic expansion, prepared claims against the Order, which means I can now fix Poland's biggest mistake, leaving the Teutonic Order alone. I'm simply going to conquer it now. Admittedly, the Teutonic Order usually starts the game allied with Bohemia, but it typically breaks that alliance very quickly. Right now, it is only allied with Wolgast, which is a very weak German duchy. For the war, I will use the territorial claims that Poland has against the Order. They should allow me to conquer it in a single war, as long as you don't mess up the peace treaty. War. This war shouldn't be particularly difficult, so I send one army with Casimir into battle, and the other army, led by someone else, to begin sieging fortresses. In the meantime, I build a hospital in Krakow. Returning to the war after defeating Wolgast's forces, I move onto its territory, and after a few months remove that duchy from the war in exchange for war reparations and money. Now it's time for the Order, whose armies have scattered somewhere. In the peace treaty, the most important thing is to take only the Order's territories. Remember that one province located inside the Holy Roman Empire, and ignore all the vassals. Because by conquering all of the Order's territories, you literally inherit all of its subject states, for 0 antagonism points. It's also worth conquering the Teutonic Order fairly quickly, because otherwise it can grow large enough that you won't be able to defeat it in a single war. And now look, essentially the entire eastern part of Prussia consists of territories, where it's worth creating some kind of subject state. Meanwhile, that location in the middle of Germany must be made into a vassal, because thanks to that, we as Poland gain a bonus to institution spread. I release the remaining locations as fiefdoms, simply because I don't have many of them. Now I have a moment to focus on the Renaissance research tree. I need better levies against Bohemia, as well as reduced costs for founding cities and building manors. Only after that do I take all the developments that increase literacy among all social classes. Because around this time, Casimir's radical reform should take place, which for 20 years further reduced the cost of building cities and towns. This combines perfectly with the technology bonus, and I return to dealing with my new vassals, whose relations I now improve. Actually, probably with the old vassals first. The first potential coalition against me has already formed, but it's not dangerous. Once I gain access to the sea, I immediately introduce several additional laws. And remember to develop locations with amber. You won't earn from taxes on it, but it will strengthen trade. My new rival without a doubt becomes Bohemia, which unfortunately is still not fighting any wars and continues to grow stronger. I resume migrating large amounts of population to Krakow, which will continue until the arrival of the Black Death. And it is already spreading. So right after dealing with the Teutonic Order, I essentially move into step 4, where besides death, some rebellions await me as well. Waiting for the Black Death is essentially a period of accumulating money, or constructing peasant buildings, because they will always generate some income for me. During what was probably the third parliament, I changed quite a few laws. Primarily, I wanted to weaken two values: spiritualism by increasing humanism, and traditionalism by increasing innovation. This will then give me access to that reform that boosts research. I also increased taxes, so now I set the slider for all estates to the maximum, as well as maximizing coin minting, and for a year I will be farming such high taxes. With decentralization pushed this far, I don't really have to worry much about the drop in estate support. And then it arrived, the Black Death. I isolate my court and introduce segregation of the infected. At this point, it also makes no sense to encourage migration to Krakow anymore, because that would only intensify the disease and mortality in that location. Now I will rather focus on improving stability as well as legitimacy. The plague has passed and took 500,000 citizens. And now, finally, with the money I saved, I can recruit heavy cavalry. Naturally, I will place the ruler at its head, and just when I had increased royal authority and brought the budget and estate support under control, Casimir pulled off something. The Polish king decided he wanted to push through more reforms in the state. And worst of all, to get the best possible bonus from them, you have to anger literally all social estates. So I angered the nobility and the burghers, which also had a very negative impact on my vassals. The peasantry took a hit as well. In fact, the only estate that didn't get affected was the clergy. To prevent these reforms from ending in a civil war, I maximized spending on legitimacy. Although a crisis of authority is still looming. Ultimately, despite the turmoil, Poland emerges stronger from these reforms, introducing the Piotrków Statutes. This legal reform will positively affect estate satisfaction, but more importantly, I will be able to raise taxes on all social estates. However, the real reward for the suffering is here, in the form of this 20-year bonus, which provides an incredibly large boost to crown power and increases the levies. And now it's time for the repercussions. The Poznan Confederation has formed. It simply has to be crushed. I call upon the Hungarians for assistance, as well as my own levies, though I will be very conservative with it. Although it turned out that the rebellion itself is very small, so I allowed myself to win this war on auto. Beautiful! From now on, I also use subsequent parliaments mainly for territorial claims, as well as increasing taxes, because unfortunately it takes me some time to prepare a casus belli to destroy the opponent when it comes to the Bohemia. I also remembered one important thing. I distribute the privileges I was supposed to grant after the plague. Building roads will come in very handy. I also begin annexing my vassals, starting with Sieradz. Unfortunately, just when I was about to attack the Bohemia, I had to break my alliance with Hungary. That country decided to commit collective, or rather, France supported Moldavia's independence, and since I am now preparing a casus belli against the Bohemia, my levies has already recovered, unlike the Bohemian one. Mainly thanks to Casimir's radical reforms, I can move on to the next step, which is the conquest of Silesia, where I will also show you how to profit from coalitions. My first war with the Bohemia, however, doesn't take place until 1358. quite late. And worse still, I can't use the threaten war option because I'm simply not a great power. Not yet a great power. That's why a parliamentary casus belli is just a waste of support. However, the Bohemia are still my rival, so I will use a conquest casus belli against them. This war will rather be evenly matched, all things considered. Though I might wait out the winter until around March. And I gathered my armies into one large force under the king's command. And I immediately marched into Silesia to wipe out those smaller armies. It is very important to eliminate them as quickly as possible. Because for now the Bohemia have a numerical advantage. I order my vassals' armies to gather near Sieradz, so likewise I must command my vassals to attach to my armies. I am not spending money during this war, I need to keep it just in case, so I can recruit mercenary armies if necessary. The first war with the Bohemia is crucial and unfortunately very difficult. And the objective in this war is to win battles. The first major battle I fight is not against Bohemian forces but Moravian ones and some others, which I win without much trouble. Well, great, another plague has just started in Pomerania, and that has brought the plague into my army. After several battles, I managed to reduce Bohemian forces. Now I have a slight advantage. I myself didn't lose too much. Look at the quality advantage of the Polish army. I did make a mistake though, because I split my forces too much. In this game you really have to play cautiously. The AI very often exploits the fog of war and likes to ambush smaller forces. There it is, the main Bohemian army. And fortunately we have a cavalry advantage. Thanks to that I might have the edge in this battle. Despite that advantage, the forces were rather evenly matched, especially since a vassal attacked too early. Unfortunately the losses were quite comparable. And that includes cavalry. After one of the subsequent battles, when I already have a massive advantage, I start spending money on expanding RGOs, because this war will most likely end in my victory. And when the Bohemia are left with only 3,000 levies, all that remains is to capture the capitals of the Silesian duchies. Unfortunately, over the last few patches, Paradox has changed war costs. Basically, it doesn't matter whether I take these locations for myself or make them vassals. It costs me exactly the same amount of war score and antagonism. I don't like this change. So unfortunately, I won't take much from the Bohemia, just this. I focus on seizing all fortresses and locations with gold and silver mines. War reparations will also come in handy. Yes, the borders are messy and ugly, but I can't do anything about it for now, because I have a very large coalition, and I am now starting the process of countering it. It's not really worth improving relations with either the Bohemia or the Silesian duchies. Instead, I will focus on all the larger German states with bigger armies. From the conquered territories, I release the Silesian duchies again, mostly as fiefs because I have far fewer of those than vassals. Because of that, I'm now forced to increase my diplomatic spending, which actually balances out quite well, and soon my income will be even higher since I've taken over gold-producing locations, which happens shortly after. With the money I saved during the war, I build more towns near Krakow along the Vistula. The coalition has formed, however, and I now have a list of countries with which I need to improve relations, which will be difficult because they have just declared war on me. Which is actually an opportunity. Well, it would be an opportunity if I had attacked them. The key to winning a coalition war is winning battles, a large number of battles. The second thing is simply to survive for 1 year, no more. Since this is a war where I was attacked by the coalition, it's not worth prolonging it, so after a year I simply sign a white peace. If I had been the one to attack Volgast, I would have dragged out the coalition war long enough to sign separate treaties with each of those countries, forcing them to pay me money and war reparations, and after this war, my diplomats have plenty to do. Let's return to my new cities. I am building marketplaces here. It's very important to increase the capacity of the Krakow market as quickly as possible to supply salt across all of Europe. After the recent changes, salt is needed for many buildings to function. It's also used for food preservation, so the more the market needs it, the more salt is required. So Wieliczka and Krakow will generate increasingly higher profits. In the meantime, I have already unlocked professional armies. As usual, I first go toward armories, but in this case I also want armed knights from the levies as quickly as possible and upgraded heavy cavalry to support it. Because later, as Poland, I need to complete that entire idea tree as quickly as possible. And I won't really have time to unlock better military units from this era. Just before my second war with the Bohemia, I can say that I've already improved relations with many countries, and they no longer join coalitions against me. On top of that, I got lucky. The Bohemia are currently at war with France for some reason, so this is the perfect moment to attack them again, even though they still have support from many German states. And that is actually very good news for me, because since I am the one attacking this time, each of those countries will simply pay me war reparations. Besides, this time my opponents already have much smaller forces at the very start of the war. I strongly benefit from the fact that my levies replenishes faster thanks to serfdom. After a year, I signed the following peace with the neighboring states: money, war reparations, prestige. Those are the most important. The best part is that more countries keep joining this war, for example, many Italian states now. And I conquer and loot them one by one in exactly the same way as the German states. Ending the second war with the Bohemia, I once again take many Silesian vassals. However, I still make sure that no major country joins the coalition. It also seems that the duchies have broken free from the Bohemia, so there's a good chance they will soon join the coalition on their own, and I'll simply conquer them in the next war. In Krakow, 5 new armories are already being built, and in other nearby locations where I have very high control, I also build armories, because remember, manpower depends on control. After the second war with the Bohemia, I financed many new towns. I already have them in most of my provinces, and where I was missing them, they are now under construction. Additionally, I am already gathering population in Warsaw, and I begin improving relations with all the Silesian duchies I already have. Yes, my diplomats really have a lot to do now. I added Mazovian culture as accepted in Poland, and unfortunately his son ascends to the throne, and that means I now have to prepare the country for the upcoming civil war. In step 6, I will show you how to use that civil war to strengthen your own authority. And honestly, the fact that the nobility demanded power is the best thing that could happen to Poland. Since I plan to play towards strengthening royal authority, before the rebellion breaks out, I need to weaken that authority as much as possible. So wherever I can, I appoint nobles. Ideally, the crown should drop below 15%. Then all that remains is to wait for the rebellion to erupt. I use the cabinet to weaken the aristocracy in favor of plutocracy. After less than 2 years, the nobles' rebellion broke out. Surprisingly fast, in another run of mine, it took almost 20 years. Nevertheless, it is a very painful rebellion. However, now each year I can weaken one of the estates, in this case the nobility, pushing the country toward plutocratic values. I can end the nobles' rebellion in 3 ways. Either I strengthen the crown to 37%. Yes, something didn't quite work here, it should be much lower. Alternatively, paradox may have made this crisis harder, or I can let the burghers win, which would result in establishing a republic, or follow the historical path and let the nobility win. In the meantime, I also unlocked the Renaissance and banking. I want to develop an additional cabinet slot and another reform for my country as quickly as possible. Reducing the cost of annexing vassals will also be useful, and I do have quite a few vassals. In banking, the grosz krakowski is extremely important, as well as the invention of docks. Only after that do I return to my bonus idea path. I also managed to secure an alliance with France, mainly because I don't want to be randomly attacked by a coalition. I want to be the one attacking coalitions and collecting money, which is exactly what I'm doing during another war with Bohemia. Oh, turns out I can't actually afford the alliance with France. Oops. So let's use France to finish this war faster, and then I'll end the alliance. I played this war the same as always, first focusing on destroying the smaller armies of all those coalition members, and once their armies are wiped out, I move on to sieging the provinces I need to capture. Of course, just to make things harder, England has just attacked France. Even the Bohemian armies don't stand a chance. The Silesian territories, I take them for myself. The Bohemian capital has already been looted so many times that only 2 artifacts remain there, and now only 1. From Bohemia itself, I want nothing except money. This country will be an incredible bank for me to issue non-repayable loans. And there it is, the last Silesian duchy conquered. So all of Silesia is now under my boot. As a result of this war, I destroy many forts in Bohemia and Moravia, and take the rest of their money. A lot of money. From these newly acquired territories, I don't release vassals, I simply integrate them using my cabinet action. And right on time, I can introduce another government reform for Poland. And for me, there's nothing better for Poland than simply increasing scientific research, which is exactly what I was aiming for by shifting values. I use the next parliament to weaken the aristocracy and strengthen plutocracy, which means I need to shift the progress of this value toward plutocracy, ideally keeping it at 0. And weaken the aristocracy each year using this action, which means I'll have to deal with smaller rebellions. By the way, the Courland event has been fixed. It has formed for me. In the meantime, it turned out that I'm not the only one struggling with a coalition. France has a much bigger problem, so I ultimately abandoned the alliance with that country. Unfortunately, without France, I was immediately attacked. Honestly, these coalitions are more annoying than dangerous. After 3 years, I looked at France and it seems they actually won their coalition war. Meanwhile, a small civil war broke out in my country. In fact, during this rebellion, civil wars erupt every few years. And finally, after all these years, I managed to reform the country and win the civil war. And all thanks to that one ship, because I assigned a relative to it, and that gave me victory. The triumph of the crown massively strengthens Poland. That is me, since in practice it means the authority of the crown, and I further weaken the nobility by revoking a few random privileges. The strength of the nobility in the country drops below 25%, which allows me to extract massive taxes from them. And now that I've conquered the Silesian duchies, integrated most of them, and strengthened royal authority, I move on to a path of rapid economic growth. But even better, we'll see where the capital and governors should be placed. Since I have a lot of legitimacy and stability, I'll first focus on introducing a better inheritance system. One based on the favored son, essentially the one with the highest stats. It's an extremely costly change, but it will definitely pay off in the long run. In fact, I had also been holding off on declaring a saint until now. And suddenly I can't do it anymore. Why could I do it just a moment ago and now I can't? The Hussite wars have begun in Bohemia, and honestly for me this is the perfect time to expand. Because I keep getting 300 to 500 gold for granting passage to each participating country. I invest this money into towns, making sure I have libraries, temples and bridges over every river, granaries to speed up population growth, and marketplaces in literally every single town and city. Oh, more money, how nice. With that money I found a town in Pszczyna, and yes, this location will soon once again become the capital of Poland in my next campaign. It's simply too good. This location lies perfectly between the Oder and the Vistula, and it's very close to the Warta. And in the future, it's quite possible that I'll take Moravia and Slovakia. I'm not yet sure where I'll build the governor, I'll still be testing that. However, I am certain that I need a new market in Gdansk because the Swedes are stealing my money. Although I won't hide that, it's a bit of a shame to move the capital from Krakow, which is an incredibly well-developed city. However, the entire Pszczyna province is much better. In Bytom we have silver. There are also locations with food. Because of that, in the later stages of the game, I won't have to spend a fortune buying food for a developed province. Coal and wood are key components of many products, such as weapons or paper, which means production efficiency will simply be higher. I gathered over 3000 gold just from granting passage through my lands, and I spent it to move the capital, which will soon significantly increase control in my gold-producing locations, by about 20%. On top of that, I'll also make sure there are always bailiffs here. After integrating the Silesian vassals, I now build roads along the Oder as well as to adjacent locations, and bailiffs across all of Silesia, in every single location that wasn't a city. Alright, Poland is practically unified. And honestly, I have several potential locations where I want to establish a governor. The first is Kowal or Koło. These two locations are very close to the Vistula and the Warta. Koło is unfortunately a small province, but it contains iron. Kowal, on the other hand, is a much larger province and contains wool. Another candidate for the governor is Gdansk. It's an incredibly strong port, especially if I plan to conquer Scandinavia in the future. And then there's Warsaw. It doesn't really have anything special in terms of resources, but it already has a sizable population and lies in a fairly interesting river basin. It might be the best location if I plan to expand far to the east, which in fact I do, so no spoilers. And ultimately this is roughly how each of the three locations compares. In the end, I built the governor in Koło. The name is simply glorious, and it's definitely not because it reminds me of the title of that movie. And no, don't watch it. It's trash, but funny. Koło and Kowal spread proximity in almost the same way. Though Kowal does it slightly better toward Gdansk, however, iron provides a significant advantage. It's quite possible that my third governor will be built either in Gdansk or in Warsaw. I funded a university in Krakow. Another event I'm seeing for the first time, and I've probably played Poland around 20 times already. But since I have one in Krakow, I'll build them elsewhere as well. Because combined with highly advanced innovation, it will give me a solid research growth rate. However, the biggest problem I have is that I can't tax the nobility enough. Because if I could set it to the maximum level, just look at how much more money I'd be making. This Poland, even though it has a lower base tax than Spain or England at the same point in time, can earn almost twice as much. So now that my Poland is economically and militarily prepared for further expansion, it's time to answer the question, what's next? I won't hide that my goal for the later stages of the game would be to become an empire as quickly as possible, preferably the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. However, I can't do that as a Catholic country, because there are no emperors among Catholics. As it happens, right next to me there is a large Orthodox religion, and also to the south, which is one of the stronger religions in the game. So if I continued playing, I would switch Poland's religion to Orthodox, especially when I begin conquering Ruthenia. As for the army, as you can see, I don't have a regular army, but I do have a fairly large levies. When moving east into battle, I wouldn't use a regular army. Instead, I would divide my levies into 5 armies, each with 2 units of professional cavalry and a few cannons to speed up sieges of fortresses, of which there are some in that region, though not too many. As for the conquest themselves, I would start by using parliament to fabricate a casus belli on one of the neighboring countries, so that I can use the threaten war option since I'm already a great power. However, this can be problematic because these are usually low-developed provinces and the opponent is weak enough that they might simply hand them over. So sometimes you need to fight an initial war first, to approach the capital and be able to demand it in every subsequent war. The second method is very careful selection of rivals. Basically, every country I plan to conquer would become my rival and I would create the destroy enemy casus belli against them. And what after the war? That depends on how you want to proceed. You can go for centralization and then integrate those locations. With centralization, you can usually afford to have around 6 vassals, and this results in somewhat slower expansion. Or you can continue playing toward decentralization until around 1600 and create a vassal from each individual province, then integrate them after 10 to 20 years. For both strategies, I would immediately change the culture of each of those vassals to Polish. And if you want to see how the strategy of conquest through a large number of vassals works, I recommend that episode from Spain, where using this approach I very quickly conquered the entire Iberian Peninsula.